welcome to this latest edition of Words of Hope. Today I'm recording in a very special occasion. This Peace Garden, located on Stanborough Park in Watford, England, was created not to commemorate war, but to focus on peace, those who stood for peace, and ultimately the God of peace. It is the perfect place to come and spend some time in quiet meditation, and it is also an appropriate place to be, as this weekend we celebrate peace in the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, VE Day. Lockdown may be limiting the size of celebrations, but we will take a little bit of time to review some Adventist history from the period. We also have some very special music with a message of peace that you can sing along to. But first, Victor Hulbert caught up with our TED president Raafat Kamel to see how his life and work has changed over the past 2 months and what plans he may have for the future.
Raafat, we've not physically seen each other for a number of weeks now, and your life has changed. What's it like not actually having stepped on an aeroplane for 8 weeks or so?
Oh, Victor, what a question. Let me try my best to give you a diplomatic answer. It's a joy and a relief. Of course, our lives have changed, and just this connection with you and everyone else to do this one-dimensionally is a very strange way of doing this. I don't think we were created to be separate like this. We were created to be together as a community, to connect as colleagues and friends. And there's no question, although I'm enjoying that brief break in not taking another flight or flying somewhere, another plane, there's something in me, the desire to connect with people again, and I miss that.
We kind of see that, don't we, even with our office family worship, where we always have a good number of people come to worship, but now we're isolated, the numbers have actually increased.
This is not only the case, of course, for our worships. It is when we meet with the presidents in the afternoon, and many Zoom meetings we have with our colleagues, department directors at the general conference, within our fields, and of course the local churches. I see in my own local church, there are people I can't remember meeting before, and there's so much higher attendance, a yearning to connect spiritually. We miss our spiritual family.
Of course, you're not traveling now. You're sitting quietly in your office. Nobody's disturbing you. Probably your garden's looking very good because you've now got all this spare time. How are you filling all this space you've suddenly got?
Oh, thank God for good weather. We're enjoying some good weather, and you're right about the garden. But I also have discovered in my work now with the Zoom meetings that my work didn't decrease, actually increased. We're spending enormous amount of time just trying to maintain that connection. We have taken the slogan in our office, that objective that we are still open for business. And of course, by doing that, you need to constantly deal with issues, conflicts, make decisions on budgets, look at your own finances, look at the way the church operates, just in a different way. And that requires a new energy and a new creativity, and surrounding yourself, as we have in the division office, creative people, resourceful people, resilience to make that switch so quick. And I see this in our local pastors as well in the fields. It's amazing to see that switch that they made so quickly during this crazy time that we're living in.
Do you find it's being positive? Because now, we're now having a directors get together with you every Monday. You're meeting with the union presidents every Thursday. Is there some kind of positive side to this togetherness, or is it becoming a bit of a strain on the mind?
I always ask at the end of the meeting, especially these kind of, I call them informal gatherings, we call them share and pray, especially with the presidents as well, with the department directors. They tend to be informal gatherings. And I tend to ask, should we continue with this? And there's a resounding yes, we need this. We need to stay closer. So we're actually meeting weekly, which we haven't done before, to share, to pray together, and also share ideas. We're learning so much about creativity from our different fields, from our even directors who are so different. We learn from each other. How do we operate in a virtual world?
We are now starting very slowly to see restrictions easing in certain parts of Europe, some places faster than others. It looks like some of our churches may shortly reopen. The schools in some of our countries are starting to reopen. And we have to think, what's the world going to be like? What's the church going to be like post-lockdown?
Yesterday, one of the main points that we had with our directors in the office, how do we plan to adjust and readjust now? Because the world that we're operating in, I don't believe, we hear it often say, it's not going to be the same. Even the way we do church business, even the way we meet on a Sabbath morning, there's a sensitization in a spiritual sense that people want to join, want to come back. There are those who haven't been to church for years. And so how do we embrace? How do we come back together to worship him? There's some people may be feeling too comfortable and say, oh, I feel comfortable at home on a Sabbath morning, or I prefer this way of doing business remotely. How do we encourage back to that fellowship that we had before?
So mission will continue, but it may look slightly different.
Correct. That's right. And we will adjust that. As I told you, I thank God for the resilience of our colleagues, of our workers, of our pastors, the way they adjusted so fast to a very changing reality. And I believe that we can go back and adjust as well. Pick on the strength, the things that we've learned, and maybe discard those that shouldn't be there. And this way we sharpen the focus on what we do.
It really stirs your heart when you look at a monument, a memorial like this, to those who fell in the First and then the Second World War. And that's of particular significance this weekend as we remember the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, VE Day, as we like to call it. Originally there were supposed to be celebrations and street parties and all sorts of big events for this 75th anniversary, but the events may need to be more in the memory. And it's kind of in my memory, I'm thinking, you know, where my parents were during this horrific period when so many people lost their lives. My parents were both students. They were studying at Newbold College. My father was studying to become a minister. My mother, Ruth, was studying to become a Bible worker. And they lived through the harshness of the war, not fighting in it. My father used to be a fire watcher. He used to be on the roof of the hall, Packwood Hall, where the college was at that time, a fire watcher, waiting for the bombers to come across from Germany to deposit their bombs in the West Midlands and on Birmingham, and that was part of his role. But during that time they were studying to tell people about Jesus, to tell people about repentance and love, to actually tell people about peace. And it's very interesting that, okay, they could celebrate VE Day, victory in Europe. They then got married on VJ Day, victory in Japan. And very shortly after that, as a married couple, they made their way to Africa and served there as missionaries for 12 years, mainly in Nigeria, sharing the gospel, sharing the good news of Jesus. Their role, and they felt very strongly about it, was not to take life, but to give life. It wasn't war, it was peace. And peace is often a very difficult thing. I've been studying again about those conscientious objectors in the First World War who refused to fight, many of whom ended up in prison because they refused to fight. And I read a very interesting article in the Missionary Worker. That was the Adventist Church's magazine at that time in the British Isles, and it's called A Moving Letter. It came from the front line in France, where 14 of these Adventist conscientious objectors were working in the docks, and they were there because they were pacifists. They were also there because of their belief of keeping the Sabbath. They wouldn't work from Friday sundown till Saturday sundown, and that got them in trouble with their commanding officer from time to time. And on one occasion, the officer had warned them 4 times, you need to work on the Sabbath, on Saturday, but they downed their tools on the Friday at 4 o'clock, And as a result, they were arrested and marched to the guard room, where they were to be seen by medical officers to see if they were fit for punishment. And that punishment would be that you did hard labor all day, and then you would be tied in a crucifixion mode to a gun wheel for 2 hours in the hot sun. It was a very cruel punishment, but it was done to make sure, you obeyed the commands. Well, they went to the one medical center and the doctor had gone. So they took them, marched them double speed to another medical center. That doctor also had gone. And so they said, okay, you'll just have to stay in the guard room for the night. Got to the guard room, it was full. So they said, okay, you can go back to your barracks for the night and your punishment will start tomorrow. They woke up the next morning, 6:30, expecting the commanders and the guards and everybody to come. And eventually the commander did come, but he came at 10 o'clock and he said, boys, when a command is given in the army, you have to follow that command. There's no room for disobedience. He repeated it 3 times. But then he said to them, you guys are actually the best workers in the docks. You're the ones that we can really rely on and depend on, and it would be a shame to lose your labor. But you must never disobey a command. And then his tone changed. And he reminded them, you're good workers, and we don't want to lose you. And we've talked and we've decided that you can have your Sabbaths off. I'll give you 5 minutes to think about it, and if you agree, then it'll be okay. Well, one of the guys there, Magrici, that was his name, he almost jumped up and said, we don't need those 5 minutes. But he responded after the 5 minutes, he said, sir, we're only too glad to accept your kindness. We cannot express our feelings of gratitude, but we thank you and trust that we shall be able to express our appreciation by faithful work in the future. And in reply, the commandant, he was very moved, and he says, now boys, let this be the last trouble. Let's work together as one big family. Family isn't really a term you think of in the army, but they had a good relationship because they'd learnt to trust each other. They'd learnt they were dependable. And what I've learnt equally in this kind of lockdown situation that we're in at the moment is that family is important. Whether it's your family in the units, your biological family, and even if you're isolated, the ability to be able to phone them, to talk to them. Whether it's your church family, my church is just across the road there, and they're important to me as well. My work family is important, and we're finding at work we actually have more people coming to our morning worship by Zoom than we ever had physically, because we want that time together. And then for my parents, who spent those 12 years away from family because they went to Nigeria, and those Nigerian boys and girls that they worked with, the men that they worked with and the women, they became their family. And it was fascinating for me that in their older years, my father, my mother, my uncle, who also went as a missionary to Nigeria and Sierra Leone, when you sat and talked with them, their most favorite memories were reminiscing about those times that they spent as missionaries, as serving God. Life was difficult for them at many times. Life was difficult when they were in the war like this, with the rationing, with the shortages, with the pressure that even though you are a pacifist, really you should go and fight. It was difficult in Africa at many times. It's difficult in our lives at times. It's difficult at the moment with the lockdown. But we find that family draws us together. And actually Jesus gives us that same family promise, because when you look in John chapter 14, which is a chapter where Jesus is talking about things just before he's going to be arrested, before he's going to go through a trial, before he's going to be crucified. And he says to the disciples, he says, my peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. Giving peace just before there's going to be terrible trouble and disappointments. Giving peace is something that we as Christians do in the name of Jesus Christ, even when things are difficult. I want to leave you in these words of hope today with a song, with a hymn that was written in a very difficult, troubling time for the author, for Horatio Spafford, who had lost 4 members of his family in a boat disaster crossing the Atlantic. And yet he could write those words, "When peace like a river attendeth my way." He could write, "It is well with my soul." Listen to these words and let them speak to your heart and your soul. Maybe even sing along with those words as we remember that in every situation, in war, in peace, in lockdown, in freedom, Jesus is the source of peace and shares peace with all of us.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trial should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin,